I'm your narrator. You're probably wondering why I just shushed you. It's a pretty weird way to start a YouTube video, isn't it? Well, let me tell you why. This is Greg. He's concentrating extremely hard right now, and I don't want to disturb him. You see, Greg's been building his dream website for months now. He didn't really know how to code when he started, but he's always loved to learn new things and thought this would be a fun and easy project. He's learned quite a bit since he started, mostly picking up the basics of coding as he's gone along. Greg's been looking a little frustrated lately, though. I think the project might be getting to him. When he started the project, he looked like this. And now, well, you can see. You know what? Greg might need a little break. At least it looks like he could use one. This way, we can check on his progress. I bet he's got some great things for us to see.
Psst, Greg. Hello, Greg. Greg! Hi, Greg. How's your website project going? Well, what's wrong? Isn't it going well? You've been at this for months now. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Is it the coding that you're having trouble with? Don't feel bad, Greg. Coding isn't easy and it isn't for everyone. Say, what if I told you there was another way you could build your dream website without needing to know any code at all? Would you be interested in something like that? All right, Greg. Calm down. How about I show you how to install something called WordPress on your web host? Would you want to learn how to do that? Don't worry, Greg. This isn't like coding. Are you ready to start? Okay, sure. I'll wait. Just make it quick. This stupid skit is already too long. Okay, interesting choice. Let's just pretend that didn't happen and get started. Installing WordPress on your site isn't too difficult if you take the right steps, do a little planning, and prepare for the install. The easiest way, our recommended way, and WordPress's recommended way is to use your host provider's, quote, one-click WordPress installation that more than likely comes with your hosting plan. If your host doesn't provide this, there's still a way to install WordPress manually, but it's extremely involved for a beginner, and I don't recommend it. Starting with the recommended way of installing WordPress through your host provider as your first option, there's something you need to do before you jump into the install process itself, and that's to choose the right web host. I'm starting here because it would just be wrong if I didn't talk about selecting a host provider before you do anything. This one step can make all the difference in both installation and performance of your website. And that's because not all host providers are the same, which is especially true when it comes to WordPress. Believe me, I've made this mistake before using a cheaper but not recommended host, and it was the worst experience I've ever had with running a website. It's not hard to select the right host. There's just a few things you need to look out for, and if you do, you should be fine. Alright, so for starters, the host must be able to run PHP on their servers for WordPress to function. Many hosts offer different programming languages as options to their customers, and nearly all of them can install PHP. The problem is a lot of first-time website owners have no idea what these options mean. To help you, many if not most host providers will now ask you if you plan to use WordPress when you sign up for a plan. Yes, WordPress is that popular. This way, they can make sure both the server and database are ready for you when you install WordPress. In fact, once you say you plan to use WordPress, most host providers will now take you directly to the WordPress setup process, so you don't need to search for it, which is pretty convenient. The second thing about host providers that makes them different is that not all hosts are optimized for running WordPress. WordPress is huge and fairly complex as a platform. This means there are a lot of PHP calls, loading of various style sheets, JavaScript, and once you start adding themes and plugins, it only gets more complicated. For that reason alone, you need to make sure you're choosing a host and a plan that can handle the amount of resources WordPress is going to take up. Hosts that offer, quote, unlimited data and, quote, unlimited bandwidth are a must in my opinion. And if you're wise, you'll follow the recommendations of WordPress themselves for hosts. Now, many would disagree with me on this, and I understand why, but for the novice who has never done this before, This will help eliminate many headaches you might encounter. Here are the top 3 hosts WordPress recommends, and no, I have no affiliation or stake in any of them: Bluehost, DreamHost, and SiteGround. It's up to you who you choose as your host provider, and maybe you already have a host. But all 3 of the listed providers above, according to WordPress themselves, make WordPress easy to install, are optimized for WordPress, and will hopefully save you from too many problems. There's always going to be issues. I just tend to try to mitigate risk as much as possible. I don't have time for that. I bet you don't either. Now that that's out of the way, once you decide on your host, it's time to install WordPress and get you up and running. This probably could go without saying, but if you use the one-click installation method most host providers offer, again, I can't recommend this enough. Just follow the directions on the screen. It's extremely easy to do, and if for some reason you run into a problem, you can always open a chat window or call the host customer service phone number, and they can get you up and running. It is by far the best way to install WordPress on a host server, and it might be the only way depending on your host. Saying that, it isn't always easy to find the WordPress installation option on all host provider sites. Most will have a tab or a link to something labeled maybe add-ons, additional software, or optional installations. Typically, this is where you can choose the software you want to add to your little section of the server, including WordPress. If you can't find this area, you'll need to ask your host where to go, or just ask them to install WordPress for you. They all do their own little thing for some reason, don't ask me why, so I can't really help you beyond what I just said. But what I can do is give you a real-life example of one host's methods for installing WordPress. This example is on Bluehost, and it's how you would install WordPress if you didn't do it when you signed up for your plan. It's pretty simple, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, so please pause the video if you need a little more time, or you can find the steps in the description below, or, if you're on the blog, in the text below. All right, ready? Here we go. Number 1. Find the Marketplace button on the left menu. Number 2. Once you are in the Marketplace, scroll down to the heading titled Featured Products. Number 3. Under the heading are tab links called Popular, Themes, Services, etc. Find the one called One-Click Installs and click on it. Number 4. This will take you to the easy one-click installation of the many CMS platforms available to you. Once you're there, scroll down and find WordPress, which is usually the first one, and click Install. 5. This will take you to a new page to, quote, create a new WordPress site. Type in a title and a tagline for your WordPress site and click Next. You can edit the title and tagline later if you want. You can also click on the advanced options if you want to, but that's not covered in this video, and it isn't necessary for a basic WordPress installation. 6. This is when you'll be taken to the final step of installation, and this might be the most difficult if you've never done this before. Trust me though, it only looks scary. This is where you decide what folder you're going to install WordPress in. Here's what you need to know before you decide. The first thing is, the first box is your domain. We didn't cover getting one of those. I'm kind of assuming you've already purchased one? But this is the main address for your site. If you have multiple domains in your account, you'll be able to use the drop-down to select any of the domains you own. For most people, though, you'll only have one if you're starting out, so usually there won't be another option. The second box is the directory, and that's the tricky part. Websites run the same way as your file system on your computer does. You have main folders and folders inside folders and so on and so on. You can install anything in any folder you want, but doing this will change how your website works. For instance, let's say you type in a folder named WordPress in this box. WordPress will then be installed inside this folder. What this means is, the only way to use WordPress will be to go to yoururl.com/WordPress. If you go to yoururl.com, it will just be a blank page and will most likely cause you a lot of trouble. My suggestion is to leave the directory field blank so WordPress can be installed on your entire site. The other way is fantastic for advanced users who plan on creating a custom HTML page for their homepage, but isn't the best option for most people. 7. Below the domain and directory form are optional plugins that can be installed right away. You can deselect any or all of these if you want. They aren't necessary to run WordPress, they're just sponsored plugins that a lot of people tend to use on their site. Once you choose what plugins, if any, to install, click on Next. Number 8. From here, WordPress is going to be installed for you, which really isn't a step for you to do, but it's part of the process. It takes a little bit to finish, so be patient. Number 9. After WordPress finishes installing, you'll be sent to a successfully installed page. This is where you'll be given your username, default password, this can be changed later in user settings, the website URL WordPress was installed on, and the address to access the admin area. There's a handy warning at the bottom as well to make sure you copy your password for future access to the site. Without it, you won't be able to get into your site's admin area to create any content, and that would be a bummer. Number 10, and the final step in this process, now is when you select one of the two options at the bottom of the page. The first, go back to My Sites, will take you back to Bluehost. The second, log into WordPress, will take you to the WordPress admin page for your site. And that's it. It looks like a lot of steps, but really it only takes a few minutes and is pretty darn intuitive if you ask me. If you for some reason decided that using your host provider's installation isn't the route you want to go, or you don't want to ask your host provider to install WordPress for you, here is where I'm going to teach you how to DIY the heck out of a WordPress installation. I'm going to be very clear on this again. I don't recommend this method, not for anyone, but especially if you're new to web development on the server side. But it's true, WordPress can be installed without a host-provided user interface. It takes many more complicated steps, and in the end, you'll wind up setting up a similar installation process a host would have provided for you anyway. Please look for a host-provided installation first. Sometimes this will be found in a store or marketplace. Other times, hosts will ask you as soon as you sign up for an account if you want to install WordPress. My advice if your host provider doesn't clearly offer a WordPress installation is to ask them to install WordPress for you. A word of warning, some hosts hate running WordPress because it uses up a lot of their resources. If that happens, it's probably best to find a different host provider. Finally, the last thing before we start, if at any point you get lost in the following guide, you should stop what you're doing and call someone who knows what they're doing immediately. This guide is meant only for intermediate to advanced users. The information provided herein is only to be used as a general resource, not as an absolute or definitive instruction manual that guarantees a successful installation. Doggone Technology LLC is not responsible for any loss you may incur as a result of proceeding with the following information. You proceed and follow the forthcoming resource guide at your own risk and understand that this should only be attempted by those with prior experience in web server management and should only be attempted as a means of last resort. You agree and accept these terms by proceeding with the instruction guide. If you've decided this is the route you want to take and accept personal responsibility, here we go. The first step is to download WordPress from https://wordpress.org/download. There you will find the latest version of WordPress. At this point, you can download it to your desktop, which will make it ready to be uploaded to your host server. Once downloaded, unzip the folder to prepare it for upload. The second step may be a little tricky if you've never done this and/or don't have it set up yet. You'll either need to access your web host files via an SFTP shell or regular FTP using a program like WinSCP or FileZilla. Using FTP for this is fine and is faster, but it also isn't secure and anyone can see the files you're transferring to your web server. So I don't really recommend doing that. There's another way to upload WordPress directly to the server as well that I'm not going to cover here. For more on that, see the WordPress installation guide on their site. If you've decided to continue on, you'll most likely realize that you need to create an FTP account, or find one that's already provided for you, on your web server as well as create an SSH key. The key is basically a password that grants you access to the server files from an outside connection. This way, the two computers can shake hands on both ends securely without a fuss. The second step, once you have an FTP account set up, please refer to your software and host provider's documentation to learn more about how to do this. You can now prepare to upload WordPress to your server. To upload WordPress, you need to navigate to the public folder in your host provider's files. This is sometimes labeled public HTML, public, or the name of your URL. It's crucial that you upload your WordPress files to this folder or a subfolder inside this folder only. If you don't, WordPress can't and won't be installed. If you're only going to use WordPress for your site, it's best to just upload to the root and not to a subdirectory. Once you find that folder on your host server, you can navigate into the WordPress folder and select all the folders and files inside. You don't need the WordPress folder itself, just the contents inside for WordPress to function. After that's done, hit the upload button on the FTP software and wait. This could take a few minutes or a day. It depends on your connection, the limitations of your host, and how fast both computers are. Once it's complete, the FTP software will let you know and you can move on to the next step. The third step is, in my opinion, going to be the most difficult step to perform because this requires editing your database. The problem is I can't give you specific instructions for how to access this directly. Most PHP-ran websites use MySQL as their database, but WordPress doesn't specifically require MySQL, it's just the most common. WordPress does require the use of MySQL or MariaDB to function. So hopefully your host uses one of those and not something like MongoDB. What'll make this the most difficult is how your host has set up your access to the database. You'll need permissions to create a database here, and some hosts don't allow users to do that. You may need to contact them to do this. By far the most common way to access and make changes to the database is through phpMyAdmin, which is what I'll be covering moving forward in this section. If for some reason your web host uses a different interface for your database, which I've personally never seen before, you'll need to refer to the documentation for that software, because I don't know enough about them to teach you how to use it. WordPress offers a tutorial on this very topic though, and if ours doesn't help you, theirs might. They give many other options your host might use other than phpMyAdmin. The first thing to do is to find, open, and log into phpMyAdmin, which can be a challenge in and of itself. You'll need to look somewhere in your host's admin area for this. Often it's located under a category heading inside your host control panel that's labeled software or database or something completely different. It's really up to the host where they provide you access to this, so you might need to dig or call if you can't find it. It's there somewhere though. Next, you'll need to log in. This can also be tricky because different hosts will give users different access, usernames, and passwords. Most hosts will automatically log you in once you click on the link for phpMyAdmin. If they don't, you can first try the username and password you used to log into your host's control panel. If that fails, try localhost as the username and the password you used for the host control panel. Sometimes the username is left blank, and other times root is used instead. You may need to try different combinations before you get this right. If you can't log in, you might need to ask for credentials from your host, which will take some time. Obviously, I've clicked on phpMyAdmin in Bluehost to show you an example of how you might find the program. But Bluehost doesn't actually allow users on shared host plans to add databases or users inside phpMyAdmin, which means the example you're seeing from here on out is on my local version of phpMyAdmin in my AMPS installation. Thought I should mention that if you happen to be a Bluehost user and try to do this, you can't. Well, depending on your plan, I suppose. Once you're logged in, you'll need to create a database. To do this, click on the button labeled Database in the top menu. If you have the permission to create a database, you'll see the Create Database option at the top of the database window. Enter a name for the new database in the text box with database name grayed out inside. This can be pretty much anything you want. Just don't use spaces. Instead, use underscores or dashes. Then, find the little drop-down menu next to the database name box. This is where you select your collation setting for the database. I recommend selecting UTF-8_Unicode_CI or UTF-8MB4_General_CI. Both will work with WordPress, as will others, but that explanation goes way beyond the scope of this video. Once done, click Create. After the database is created successfully, be sure to write down the database name or copy and paste it into a text editor. You'll need this to install WordPress. Once the database is created, you'll need to create a new user with all privileges granted for your new database. You probably won't have root access or high enough permissions to create a new user and assign privileges though, so this most likely won't be possible without your host doing it for you. Now, if you are able to, you'll know by doing the following. Click on the little house button in the upper left corner of your window under the phpMyAdmin logo. This takes you to the base screen for phpMyAdmin. Now, look at the top of the menu bar, and if you have the ability to add users, you'll see a menu item labeled User Accounts. If it's there, you'll most likely be able to move on to step 2. Navigate inside the User Accounts menu and create a new user via the Add New User link in the middle of the page. Once inside the menu, you'll see the Add New User form. Working from top to bottom on the form, you'll start with username. Use text field should be selected by default in the drop-down for this. If not, select it. Generally, or at least it's recommended, you should make your username your desired username _ the database name you just made. Some people just use WordPress as the username though. In reality, it can be anything you want, just don't use spaces. Now you need to select host name. This should be set to local with localhost inside the text box. If not, select local from the drop-down menu and localhost should automatically fill in. Last and most importantly, create a password. Either make your password extremely strong or generate one using the PHP password generator. I recommend using the password generator, but that's just me. It's vital at this point to write down or copy and paste your username and password into Notepad or another text editor. You'll need this to install WordPress. Once these settings and fields are filled out, find and click the Go button in the bottom right-hand corner of the page. This will save the changes you made, add the new user, and take you to the User Privileges page for the user you just made. After you've added a new user, you'll need to grant permissions to the user for your database. I'm taking an extra step here by going back to the User Accounts menu. I'm doing this just to show you that the new user has been created and what that looks like. I'm also doing this to show you how to get back to the Edit Privileges menu if you accidentally navigate away from it. Long story long, you don't need to do what I'm doing on my screen. Inside the Edit Privileges menu for your user, find the tab button that says Database between the buttons that say Global and Change Password, then click on it. This will navigate you to the Database User Assignment page with a form titled Database Specific Privileges. Now, select the database you created earlier from the scrollable list in the middle of the form. This should just highlight the choice you want to make. Once you do that, click the Go button. Now, if your new user is already assigned to your new database, you'll see it listed in the top of the form in the columnized section. But at this point, it shouldn't be assigned yet. If it is, you can skip this assignment step, click on the Edit Privileges page, and follow the next steps. At this point, you should be taken to the Permissions page for that database. Make sure everything is checked or press the Check All option. Once everything is checked, click Go. And now, your new user should be added to your new database with all global and database privileges required. Like mine, you might see Grant under Administration unchecked, and that's okay. That's to allow the user to grant permissions to other users, and we don't really need that anyway. Now it's finally time for the much easier and fun part. You should be set up with what you need to run the WordPress installation guide built into WordPress. All you need to do to start the installation process is to navigate to your domain in a browser of your choice, and the installation window for WordPress should appear. If it doesn't, you've done something wrong with your upload or typed in the wrong address. Usually this happens when the WordPress files are in the wrong folder on your host server, or you've navigated to the wrong URL based on where you uploaded your WordPress files. Double check these and navigate back again. If it still doesn't work, contact your host provider for help. Once the WordPress installation guide loads, it should be pretty straightforward. The installation guide will hold your hand through the process step by step. If you make an error, which I will show you, it will tell you and it won't hurt anything. Be sure to have your database name ready as well as the username and password you created to access that database. You won't get far without it. The first step you'll have to do is select your language. The next page you'll be sent to will ask you to accept the info you need by clicking Let's Go. It's the same info I've already said you need, so there shouldn't be any surprises on the list. There is an additional help link if you would like to follow WordPress's instructions for installation. It might help if you get stuck moving forward. Their guide is pretty complicated though, so for beginners, it might not be worth the trouble. Once that's done, you'll be asked to fill out the database connection form. This is where you'll need to have your database username and password ready, as well as the name of the database you just created. You have everything you need to fill out this form if you saved the information and followed the steps I outlined earlier. Remember, the database host I suggested was localhost. This is standard, and it should be filled out in the form by default already. The only tricky thing in this step that might be confusing is the table prefix option. This isn't required, so you can ignore it if you want. I like to add names to my table prefixes because I'm weird like that. Once the form is filled out, hit the Submit button. If there's a connection problem, such as you typed in the wrong database name, WordPress will tell you. All you need to do is click Try Again, and the guide will take you back to the database form. Double check your username, password, and database name, remembering everything is case sensitive, and try again. If you run into trouble, you may need to contact your host provider. The last step in the installation process is the site information form. Here you'll need to enter your site title. Don't worry, you can change this later in the admin area, your username, password, email address, and decide on the search engine visibility option. The username and password here are not the same as the ones you're using for the database. The username and password here should be something completely different from your database username and password. If someone gets a hold of one, they still won't be able to access the other easily. This username and password set is for your admin account to access WordPress on your website. This is how you'll adjust settings and create the content for your site. After you've filled out the form the way you like it, click Install WordPress. Once you click Install, you just need to wait for WordPress to finish installing. This shouldn't take too long, but it will vary from one install to the next. After WordPress is installed, you'll be redirected to the login page where you'll need to use the username and password for your admin area that you just created in the site information form. Hopefully you remember to save that information. If not, you'll have to use the Lost Your Password link at the bottom of the login form. After you successfully log in, you'll be directed to the admin area. This is where you'll need to begin setting up your website and creating content, which we'll cover in depth in another video. That's it for this video. If you followed all the steps, you should be up and running with the WordPress.org option. Again, and I can't stress this enough, and I know I sound like a nag, but look for your host provider's installation option before you try to manually install WordPress. It's so much easier, and there won't be any mistakes that you might have to fix later. If you can't find a place where WordPress is offered in your host store, options, apps, or software pages, they probably aren't a good host to run WordPress. If you still wanted to try installing WordPress manually, or you're setting up a local server for development, or a LAN share site for an office, and for some reason your LAMP, WAMP, or other server software doesn't offer WordPress, which most do the same way a web host does, then this should have gotten you where you needed to go. If not, I'm really sorry. I don't know how to help you any more than I just did. Thanks for watching. Check out our other video guides and tutorials on our YouTube channel or by going to doggonetech.com/resources. Be kind, like and subscribe.